The heat moved like a creature, pressing Liora into the alley until the stones scorched her palms. Smoke had turned Verrin's lower ward into a blind maze. Bells clanged somewhere she couldn't see, and rafters collapsed in brief, bright avalanches. She kept one arm around a leather satchel, the other beating at a hem that had caught, a stuttering flare, the sickly scent of singed wool. She thought, absurdly, of her mother's hands fastening that buckle at dawn, whispering only, "Keep it sealed." She had not asked why. There hadn't been time. Wind shifted. Paper embers streamed past like red moths. The alley hushed, not less sound, but a pressure, like the breath before thunder. Smoke cleaved down the center, and a figure stood at the mouth of the lane as if carved there, tall, coat black and depthless, hair like spilled ink, cheekbones cut neat as a promise. His eyes were not fire-bright. They were wine-dark, lamplight caught in garnet, terrible and steady. He crossed the distance between them as if streets were a rumor. Flame leaned away from his boots. Leora's cloak smoldered out with a hiss she felt in her bones. Cold, not mortal cold, but night air from somewhere older, wrapped her shoulders where his hands settled. "Hold to me," he said, voice low and unarguable, as if saying breathe. The alley blurred. The roar sank behind them. A heartbeat stretched until it almost snapped, and then they stood on a frost-silvered ridge above Verrin. Fire crawled over rooftops like an angry tide. The bell tower of St. Kessel listed, then fell in a spray of sparks. "Who are you?" Liora rasped. "Draven Thorn," he answered, mouth curving like he could make ruin gentle. "Moon-crowned heir of the Obsidian Court." The title landed in her mind like a tale told at a tavern and laughed off in the morning, except the world kept bending politely around him. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "The consecrated will." "I have been here longer than you know." He dipped closer. Cold breath grazed her ear. "Do you feel it? That thread between us pulling tight?" Denial rose, sensible and human. Beneath it hummed a recognition she did not own and could not refuse. "My mother said only to keep the satchel closed," she managed. "I know what it carries," Draven said. "And why they set this ward alight to flush you from the dark." Far below, a storehouse roof folded inward. The fire cheered. His eyes burned brighter in answer. "Come! Hunters first. Truth after." Her legs obeyed before courage did. She woke to a ceiling lost in shadow and veins of silver running through black stone like captured lightning. Blue fire pulsed in a wide hearth and radiated a warmth that felt like dawn remembered wrong. The bed beneath her was soft enough to trick a body into forgetting the world, and for a moment she let it. Then her hand hit empty air where the satchel should be. "My bag," she said raw. "The seal." "Unbroken," Draven answered from the hearth's edge. He leaned one shoulder against the column as if waiting for a question she hadn't thought to ask. "You will have it when you can bear to know what's inside. What do you want from me?" He came nearer. The chambers said nothing but watched them both. "Nothing you didn't promise the night you were born. I've never promised you anything." "Not me," Draven said softly. "The Oraline Pact. Your mother's line bound light to our shadow when the world was young and foolish. When you were named, the vow eased from her bones into yours. The Legion burns wards like this when that kindles, before a keeper awakens to it." Liora swallowed. She remembered no vow, only lullabies and careful winters and the way her mother's gaze sometimes fixed on a far window as if measuring a storm. "Why not tell me?" "Because the consecrated have ears," he said, and some old iron slipped under his voice. "And because the pact answers at 21 winters, not before. Tonight was your 21st. He lifted a hand, not touching. "May I show you?" "It will be loud." She nodded before sense could object. Cold brushed her temple. Light bloomed. Not pictures, not quite, impressions, a lake that wasn't water, a lattice of gold running through a night so deep it rang, two figures meeting and meeting again across centuries like a step learned in childhood. The ache that followed was not pain. It was relief sharpened to a point. "The pact recognizes itself," Draven said when the chamber returned. "And it recognized you in the street." That's why I could reach you in the fire. His gaze slid to the door. And why they will come. Steel screamed against stone down the corridor. Blue fire guttered, then surged. Draven turned his head slightly, as if listening to a familiar tune. No, he said, every inch a prince. Behind me. The doors flew. A man in ash-white plate strode through the smoke, every seam etched in sigils that made the room's temperature flinch. His sword held the color of a winter sun, the air around it hissed like fat in a pan. He did not spare Liora more than a measured glance. His eyes fixed on the vampire between them with a relief so sharp it became joy. Heretic, he said. Soulbinder. Draven Thorn, by the authority of the consecrated legion. You will not take her, Draven said, and nothing in the words was theatrical. She bears Oraline light. The night snapped. Spill it before moonset, and the rift seals. He threw his offhand, and a narrow knife of sanctified silver sung through the air, past Draven, toward Liora. She flinched. Instinct, no training, no thought, wrenched both palms up. Heat roared through her arms. The knife halted as if caught in glass, spun, and dropped to the floor with a dead bell's note. The sigils on the knight's sword faltered barely, as if someone had breathed on them. Draven's expression changed, a quick astonishment ironed flat and saved for later. The pact lives? He said. Good. Shadow jumped from his wrist and became a shield so black it seemed a hole in the world. The first strike hit it and slid, leaving a scratch that drank the light around it. His second gesture folded the knight neatly against the wall, armor whining as if it hurt to bend. Carry a message, Draven murmured, fangs the barest suggestion of a smile. Tell your master that Verrin's fire failed. The keeper woke. Send more, and you send ash. He flung the man through the doors and sealed them with a thought that sounded like thunder. Blue flames steadied. Liora stared at her hands, which glowed faintly golden in their creases, then at Draven. What did I just? You called back what is yours, he said. And the pact answered because I am its other half. He watched the words land and did not reach for her even when she wavered. The pact is a bridge, Liora. Not a chain. We guard the seam between worlds. We do not own one another. Choice sits at the center of every vow. Beyond the walls, horns cried three notes she did not know and never wanted to hear again. Draven lifted his head to the sound. They brought priests, he said very quietly. We go to the hall. I'm not hiding, Liora said, surprising herself with how steady it came. If this is mine, I carry it. For now, Draven said, and a shadow of pride warmed his mouth. With me. The Hall of Night Glass had a ceiling of crimson crystal veined with moonstone. It gathered and broke the weak winter light into 1,000 rivers along the floor. Consecrated poured through the sundered gates in disciplined lines, their prayers a hard chant that scraped the ear. At their center walked a high prelate in robes stitched with narrow threads of iron and salt. His staff glowed a pallid white that made the crystal ceiling shiver. Take the girl, he called, and the hall replied with the stamp of boots. Draven moved like water pressed into a blade. Where his hands turned, darkness rose. Where his eyes fixed, men halted as if night itself had decided to stand there. Liora stayed at his shoulder until a spear point found a path through shadow and sank toward her ribs. She didn't think. Heat climbed her spine, gold broke from her palms and struck the man full in the breast. He slid backward across stone, sigils hissing out like wet lime. Good, Draven said without looking, as if she'd remembered a step. Again. They moved. She learned the rhythm of it, his shade drinking sanctified light, her gold unhooking the prayers the legion wore like armor. The pact throbbed between them, not a rope, not a cage, more like a shared breath. The hall rocked when the prelate's staff hit stone. Cracks spidered, and a sour violet glow seeped through, wrong and hungry. Avoid mouth, Draven said. He means to tear the seam. Liora ran before fear found her ankles. Gold sheened her hands. She met the staff in a flare that snapped sight and sound into a white silence. When the world returned, the staff was a scatter of glass and prayer, the crack sealed to a silver seam. For a count of 5, no one moved. Then the consecrated broke, dragging their wounded, leaving their dead. The hall exhaled. Leora's knees went loose. Draven was there before she fell, cool hands steadying, forehead resting against hers for a breath that dragged everything back into a shape she could wear. "It starts," he said. "Not ends." They walked into a rotunda lined with onyx thrones and blue orbs that hung without chains. 7 elders watched, faces unreadable as mountain stone. Draven took the dais center, and did not try to stand in front of her. Somehow that steadied Liora more than any shield could have. "You bring a mortal to the marrow of the court," said an elder whose hair fell like poured moonlight. "Old law forbids it." "She is no mortal," Draven answered. "She bears Oraline light. Without her, the scene would bleed." "Let the pack speak," another said, voice a flake of iron. Liora stepped into the silver inlay on the floor. The inlay warmed under her soles, then brightened, and something in her chest uncoiled like a fist learning to be a hand. Gold rose along her skin in threads. A faint crimson answered from Draven without his permission. Gasps skipped the circle. "It lives," Moonhair breathed. "After centuries of silence. Power cuts 2 ways," Iron Voice said. "Joined wrongly, it spills the world." Draven's reply was too quick to be rehearsed. "Her fate is my own." The room paused. The truth of it tugged the lattice bright. "Then truth demands another choice," Moonhair said, turning to Liora. "Complete the pact and bind your life to his, or sever it while you still may. Either way ye choose." The word sever scratched. Liora looked at Draven. He did not coax. He only waited, jaw tight as if it hurt to be still. The floor trembled, dust bead rolling along the stone. A guard stumbled and breathless. "The Legion returns with relics," he said. "Old ones? The kind we do not name. The choice cannot wait," Moonhair told Liora gently. "The seam will open with or without your consent. Better it answered to a vow than to panic." Liora closed her eyes. She found not peace, exactly, but a clean line through the noise, her mother's careful hands, the heat of the alley, the way Draven had said bridge, not chain. When she looked up, fear was still there. It was simply no longer driving. "Bind," she said. "By my will." Light rose like a tide. The silver lattice under Leora's feet blazed into gold, crimson braided through, not swallowing but weaving. Draven stepped into the circle, hands open. He spoke first, voice turned low so it wouldn't shatter. "By blood and breath, by shadow and daybreak, I join what has always reached for me." Liora repeated, and the words fit her mouth as if she had learned them long ago, bearing water up winter stairs. Heat met cold where their fingers laced. The scene between their pulses blurred until counting became foolish. No crown, no grave, no dark can unmake what was made before memory. They said it together without meaning to. The lattice pulsed once and let go, not down but up, light falling like snow that melted before it kissed the floor. "It is done," Moonhair said, not triumphant, simply relieved. The stone shuddered with a new sound, less assault, more an animal bellow from far off. Draven's head turned toward the gates. "They felt it," he said. "They'll throw everything now." "Then go," Moonhair answered. "Seal what they open." They came out under a fattened moon the color of bruised milk. The fortress bridge crawled with consecrated and machines of iron and crystal that hummed in a key the earth disliked. Draven drew a curved blade black enough to erase starlight. "Stay with me," he said. It was not an order. It was a plan. They moved as one. Arrows of dark fire arced from the parapets, white bolts hissed in reply. A spear found the seam between 2 of Draven's shadows. His sword shattered it in passing, and his breath clipped only when Liora didn't see. "Purpose," he said terse. "Give the pact a direction." She did. Gold lanced from her palms and struck the machine's heart. Violet faltered. The prelate lifted a second staff and began a chant that turned the air to knives. Draven's fingers found hers in the noise. The pack surged, a column of braided light and night that climbed into the sky and met the chant midair with a ringing like iron cooled too fast. The ground split. Eyes opened in the crack, huge and patient as winter. Void walkers, Draven said. No fear, only a ledger finally balanced. We finished the vow here. Say it with me. He spoke a line she would never remember later and always know, about dawn and dusk refusing to break apart. She answered, and their power hit the tear like a door thrown not shut, but true. The machine shattered without falling. The crack zipped to a thin, grudging seam. For a breath, all held still. Then noise returned, cheers, moans, boots, the messy music of not dying. Draven's mouth found the back of Leora's hand the way some men touch relics. The pack steadied to a warm, ordinary thrum. The moon paled by a shade. Not over, Draven said, looking toward mountains that didn't like being looked at. But different. Dawn found the courtyard stitched with canvas and quiet orders. Ash drifted like exhausted snow. Smiths reheated bent blades over low coals. Healers traced salves that smoked where they touched sanctified burns. Liora walked the perimeter with Draven, learning the new map of a place that had nearly stopped existing. Arrow slits black with soot, sigils repainted in wet ink along the merlins, the broken bridge temporarily braced by ribs of shadow that felt like standing under a night sky held up by hands. Rest would be wise, said a healer whose irises glimmered pewter. She looked at Liora the way midwives look at new mothers, measuring pulse and posture, listening for what words refuse. Liora tried to say she was fine. The lie stuck. Draven answered for her, but gently. A half bell. Then the elders. He walked her to a narrow balcony over the inner ward, a slip of privacy between stone and sky. Down below, squires ferried quivers. Blue flame breathed slow in iron bowls. You held, he said. Not praise, not surprise. Fact, offered like bread. I broke, Liora said. Only in the right direction. That is all keeping ever is. A beat. Hunters return in daylight dressed as penance, not war. We don't trust penance. His mouth tilted. We also don't refuse it blindly. Which means counsel. She set her palms on the cold railing. Her hands no longer glowed. A faint warmth remained under the skin where gold had learned the roads. What's in my satchel? The choice you made last night, he said. And the one your mother made before you. His gaze flicked to her. If I place it in your hands now, you will open it. If you open it, we will leave for the lake before noon with no plan but courage. If you wait until after council, you will still open it, but with maps. Maps are fashionable. She drew in the cold and let it steady her. Council first. The rotunda smelled faintly of myrrh and wet ink. The 7 elders had traded ceremonial stillness for travel leathers and speaking voices that made room for interruption. Moonhair, Lady Iselle, Liora learned, stood over a sand table pricked with miniature iron towers. Lines of twine marked roads and rivers. A river of black glass indicated the seam's course beneath Verrin and out toward the mountains like a sleeping serpent. The Legion brought a void engine old enough to have forgotten its makers, Iselle said, tapping a glass bead. They will bring 2 next. We don't get a 3rd lesson. Iron voice, Lord Marith, did not look up from the parchment he was scarring with notes. Our wards hold if the pact keeps feeding them. But we cannot keep the pact tethered to walls. The seam's pulse shifted when you bound. He pointed the nib at Liora. You'll feel it as a pull. Likely toward the lake beneath. I already do, Liora admitted, surprised by how much relief there was in saying that aloud. Then we use the pull, Draven said. We walk it. Not we, said a younger elder with ash-dark skin and eyes like wet ink. You too. The pact is precise medicine. Too many bodies, and the dose turns poison. You will go with 5 only, 1 blade, 1 ward mender, 1 speaker, 1 pathfinder, 1 who knows the old prayers by their ugly names. The court will field armies without you. Names? Draven said. Blade Shade Captain Varro. Marith answered. Ward Mender, Master Talon. He glanced at Iselle. Speaker? Me, she said, smiling thin as paper. The consecrated listen to my voice. Sometimes to argue. Pathfinder? Draven asked. Verrin's tunnels gossip to Bran. Mara said, jerking his chin toward a lean man in a coat patched with map scraps. He claims he can make stone forget we passed it. And the prayers? Isel finished, eyes moving to a woman near the doors wearing beads carved from bone and river glass. Sister Finn. She left the Legion before most in this room were clever enough to walk. She knows where they hide their keys. Finn inclined her head, mouth wry. I don't hide keys. I remove them so doors remember how to be closed. Then we six. Draven said simply. He did not look at Liora, and somehow that made it easier to nod. Isel's gaze softened. Before you go, open your mother's choice. If it mars your resolve, better to be marred in daylight. They took the satchel to the chamber where Liora had woken. Draven set it on a low table and stepped back as if it were an altar no prince could approach. The leather had gone soft with use. The buckle was engraved in a script she had never learned but her fingers remembered. The seal was beeswax stamped with a crescent inside a circle and a tiny flaw near the rim where a fingernail had nicked it, her mother's haste made visible. Liora breathed once, twice, and broke the seal. Inside lay a wooden box no larger than a book. When she opened it, the room cooled, not a threat, a clearing. Threads of pale gold hummed across the interior as if someone had strung a lyre and then forgotten to stop it. A thin blade rested on black cloth, its metal the color of dawn fog, edge-etched with the same script as the buckle. Beside it lay a folded letter and a charm. 2 interlocked rings of different metals, one dark as rain on slate, one bright as a coin warmed in a palm. She unfolded the letter. Her mother's hand stood up on the page, stubborn, precise, as if the words would have to be pried loose from her. If you are reading this, then I failed at the one task I allowed myself to keep, hiding you until the pact could stand in you without shaking. A swallow that hurt. I did not tell you because the Legion listens for hope spoken aloud. Forgive me for choosing silence over honesty. The blade is Oraline. It cuts what is not meant to exist. It will answer only to your heat and to the shadow of the one who keeps the other side of the bridge. The rings are the last of the old oathwork. Wear them and the seam will know you. If Draven Thorn stands at your shoulder, do not run from him. He is my friend. He saved me once, before you were a name. I told him then to let you choose. If he forgets, remind him I have longer memory than princes. Liora's throat closed. She read the signature twice even though she didn't need to. Draven did not speak. When she lifted the blade, it sank to her palm without sound and warmed immediately, not metal warm, hers. Draven reached toward it and stopped. May I? She turned the hilt to him. The edge brightened along a line that met the shape of his hand and traveled back into her pulse. A bridge, he murmured. Not a chain. When he gave it back, his eyes were not the prince's. They were the man's, tired, grateful, something like warned. Keep the rings on when we cross beneath, he said. The seam is a living road. It loves proofs. My mother told you to let me choose. Liora studied him over the letter's edge. She also told me to stop dramatizing my exits, he said. I obey vows better than advice. Noted, she said, and put the rings on, the dark circle threading with a thin vein of crimson as it settled, the bright taking on a breath of gold. They left under a sky the color of cooling iron. The 6 moved like a phrase repeated until it carried its own rhythm, Varro's silent stride, armor dull to refuse light, Talon muttering to sigils with a healer's bedside tone, Bran tapping stone with a knuckle and listening hard enough to hear what wasn't there, Finn counting steps in a whisper that made consecrated prayers flinch and forget themselves, Isel speaking only to ask and never to assume. Draven walked at Leora's left, not leading so much as setting a pace the others could carry. Bran found a sally port stitched into shadow behind a buttress. Stone's sulking, he said cheerfully. Which means it remembers being moved. There's a seam tunnel under the old aqueduct. If the Legion knows it, they think it collapsed a century ago. It didn't. It hadn't. The passage was narrow and wet, choked with chiseled rubble that looked convincing until Bran breathed on it, and it sifted aside like stage dust. Air from below lifted across Leora's cheeks, cool, mineral-sweet, threaded with that hum she had been pretending for years was a river. "Here," she said without meaning to. "It's happier here." "Seems prefer understatements," Thun said. "Let your ring speak. Let your fear be honest enough to follow." They descended. Water whispered along the tunnel edge. Blue lanterns burned cold and steady, making beads of damp on the walls into tiny constellations. The hum grew into a chord that tugged at Leora's sternum like someone reminding her she'd left a door unlatched. "You too?" she asked Draven softly. "Yes." He did not pretend otherwise. "It calls me differently. Not to cross, to keep. That is what our half of the pact was born for. To stand at gates until our bones grew into the hinges. You make guardians sound lonely." "They are," he said. "Until they aren't." The tunnel widened to a cavern whose floor had once been a floor and now was a mistake, stone interrupted by a mirror surface the size of a small lake. The lake wasn't water. Liora knew that before her eyes learned it. It reflected stars not currently in Verrin's sky and gave off a scent like wet iron and first snow and the inside of a church that has been empty too long. "The Underlake," Thun said. "Not the true veil, but its mouth." She knelt and sang something so simple it felt like a child's rhyme. The mirror stirred. A path rose, two pale seams of light just wide enough for feet that knew where they were going. "Stay between," Talon warned. "The edges are not edges. They are else." They stepped onto the light and the light held. The path moved under them, not forward exactly, but through. Leora's stomach tipped once, then learned the rhythm. Draven's shoulder brushed hers. They walked into a night that was not Verrin's night, and the world changed the way a song changes at the bridge without asking permission. Stars shifted. Stone forgot to be stone and remembered it again. At the path's end the cavern opened into a chamber carved clean as a bull, its walls glossy as if a sea had licked them for centuries and then left without a trace. In the bull's center the seam rose, a narrow, standing river of light bound with threads of shadow, thin as a blade, tall as a gate. Iselle exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since the rotunda. "If the Legion pries that open before we're ready." "They won't," Varros said mildly, fingers resting on his sword as if it were a sleeping animal. "They'll try." "They won't." Finn crouched by the seam and pressed 3 bone beads to the floor. "Their relics lean on stolen names. Strip the names and the relics sulk." She glanced up at Leora. "Your part is simpler and crueler. Set your hands on the seam and ask it if it wants to be hurt. Seams hate questions. They answer anyway." Leora approached. The standing river felt colder the nearer she came. Not unfriendly, alert, like a watchful animal deciding. The rings warmed. Draven stood a step back, his silence the kind that steadies cups. Leora set both palms to light. It stung where the thin lines of crimson threaded it, it soothed where gold ran. Images nudged the edges of thought: Verrin's bridge, the hall of night glass, Draven's jaw rough with fatigue in a ruined tower, her mother's laugh in a kitchen with bad windows and good soup. "I won't hurt you," she whispered. "Not if I can help it. But I will close what others try to open." The seam took the words in like bread and kept them. A low tone built in the room. Talon hissed, not in pain, in recognition. "It's letting us mark it," he said, eyes bright. "Iselle, your sigil." She laid a thin chain of quicksilver along the floor in a circle around the seam. The chain drank the tone and glowed faintly. "If they push, this sings first," she said. "We'll hear it wherever we are." "We won't be far," Draven said. He was looking past the seam, not at it, as if he could see the corridor of night that ran beyond. "They're close. Legion feet have a way they hit stone, pious and impatient." Bran cocked his head. 24, maybe 30. "Coming careful, which is worse?" "Then we hold here," Varros said, calm as rain. "And if they force it open anyway?" Then we walk through before they do, Draven said. And we learn a road I thought was forbidden to my bones. They did not have to wait long. Consecrated prayers arrived before consecrated men, a thin saw-edged chant that crept along the walls like mildew. Finn murmured 3 words that snapped the edges off the hymn and left it dull and breathless. Rude, she said, satisfied. But they were warned. Helms appeared in the mouth of the tunnel, pale, narrow, visor slits like stingy eyes. The front rank halted at the sight of the standing river. The prelate behind them did not. He carried a staff wrapped in white cloth to its head. The cloth smoked where it kissed the air. Blasphemers, he said, voice sounded smooth. Bridge thieves, returned the girl. You keep misnaming me, Liora said before she could polish the words. I am tired of wrong names. White cloth flared. The staff's head revealed a caged shard of something that wasn't light. The chamber tightened as if remembering a bruise. Talon swore softly. Splinter of a broken gate. Where did they find that? Old field, Finn said. New holes. The prelate drove the staff toward the seam. Light recoiled around the shard. The tone Isel had called up went from hum to knife. Verro stepped into the path of the staff and took the first blow on a shield that hadn't been there until his forearm remembered how to wear it. Draven moved with him. Shadows rose and met the shard the way ocean meets a cliff, not stopping it, breaking it breath by breath. No, Draven said, not loud. Liora moved. Heat thundered up her arms. The rings on her fingers chimed high and bright. She set both palms to the seam and asked. Not words. Intention, pressed clear and steady as a palm over a child's eyes to block a nightmare. The seam shivered, then leaned toward them. Away from the shard. Toward the keepers who had given it better names. Gold braided tighter with crimson until color disappeared and only purpose remained. The caged shard screamed, a thin, almost human sound, and cracked. The prelate staggered. Verro's sword wrapped the staff. Finn's 3-bead prayer tore the cloth. Talon's open hand slammed the crack where it widened and forced it closed with a hiss that smelled like rain on a forge. The shard died like a coal dropped in snow. Silence. Then breath. Then panic, their panic. The Legion rank broke. Footsteps retreated up the tunnel fast but disciplined, as if the only shame they'd been taught was in disorder. The seam's tone eased down into its comfortable hum. No one spoke for a dozen heartbeats. Then Isel started to laugh, quiet, helpless, a sound too clean for a battlefield. You asked Asim a question, she said to Liora, wiping her eyes with the heel of her hand. And it told you it preferred your hands? Leora's arms trembled now that it was over. Draven saw the tremor and didn't touch until she flexed her fingers once in invitation. His palm met the back of her knuckles like a pledge that didn't need ink. They will come harder, he said, voice low. With less talk. Then we stop talking first, Verro said. We step through and end the lesson on the other side. Liora looked at the standing river of light. It looked back, somehow, the way a road looks when it has been waiting for the right feet. She thought of the letter in her pocket, the nick in the seal, the way her mother had written friend beside Draven's name. Fear didn't leave. It shifted over to make room for something bigger. Together, she said. Together, Draven agreed. They stepped forward, not to flee, not to chase, but to keep. The seam parted like breath on glass, and the world beyond turned its face toward them. Crossing the seam felt like stepping through breath that had decided to become weather. For a heartbeat, Liora felt every element reverse, heat to chill, sound to color, fear to weightless recognition. Then the pull eased. They stood upon a plain of shimmering dark glass, horizon drawn in bruised violet and amber where neither sun nor moon claimed the sky. Stars drifted beneath their feet instead of above, slow and patient, like a sea remembering light. This is the true veil, Draven said softly, where memory becomes terrain. Isel knelt, letting her fingertips brush the surface. Every vow leaves residue, she murmured. You can see them, centuries of oaths turned to constellations. Finn took a long breath that turned to frost. Beautiful. Also dangerous. The Void Walkers nest under forgotten promises. Bran turned a slow circle, listening to the hum beneath. There's a current flowing east. If we follow it, we reach the heart faster. The seam tugs that way. Draven nodded. We move. They began across the glassy plain. Each step echoed like music swallowed and replayed. Around them rose structures that were not quite buildings, pillars of smoke shaped like spires, arcs of light that folded inward. The veil did not decide what it wanted to be. Liora felt the pack stir in her chest. The hum here was the same as the one that had lived in her bones since the fire, only magnified until her skin vibrated with it. She touched Draven's hand once to ground herself. His pulse matched hers, steady, calm. Does it frighten you? He asked quietly. Yes, she said, but I think it's supposed to. They reached the first hollow as the horizon flickered. A pit opened where the stars beneath the glass had gone out, leaving a scar of empty nothing. From it rose a low moan, half wind, half memory. Walker Ness, Fen whispered. She dropped 3 beads that burst into gray flame. Keep close. Figures began to crawl from the void, shadows with too many joints, faces that bent like cloth in wind. Their bodies weren't bodies. They were intentions that had forgotten themselves. One turned toward Liora, its mouth splitting wider than its head, voice like cracking stone. Keeper, light belongs to us. No, she said, and gold fire blazed across her fingers. Draven's shadow leapt from him, unfurling like a banner. His sword met the first walker and sliced it into dust that evaporated with a sigh. Verrin followed, his blade a steady rhythm. Isel's voice rose behind them, weaving syllables that burned white in the air. The walkers fell like smoke rained upon by dawn. Yet the largest one, taller than a tower, pushed through the pit, dripping night. Its face was a blur, but its eyes were the same violet as the Legion's relic. The source, Draven hissed. They've learned to use fragments of the gates. Liora felt the rings on her hands heat until they hurt. The pact called for her to answer. She raised her hands, gold bleeding into crimson. The giant lurched, reaching out with claws of dream stuff. Now! Draven shouted. Their powers collided midair, a burst of molten light and night that struck the creature's chest. The impact tore silence itself. Wind exploded outward, flattening lesser shadows. When it cleared, the giant was gone, leaving only a faint line of pale fire across the plain. Bran whistled low. I think it didn't like that. Fen snorted. Then it shouldn't have come. They marched until the Vale's horizon began to brighten. Ahead lay something vast, a mountain that was also a heartbeat. The ground rose toward it in ripples, each one echoing their steps a moment too late. That's the heart, Isel said. Every oath ever sworn ends there. Liora swallowed. Including ours? Yes, Draven answered, eyes on the summit. If we reach it, we can strengthen the boundary for centuries. If the Legion's fragment beats us, the veil opens forever. The climb began. The air thickened, humming louder. Around them, half-formed memories floated like ghosts, snatches of laughter, battle cries, a lullaby Liora half recognized. Each sound tugged at her, asking her to stop and listen. She almost did until Draven touched her shoulder. They're echoes, he warned. If you listen too long, you become one. They pressed on. The peak shone ahead like glass catching dawn. When they reached the summit's ridge, they found a wide basin carved into the mountain's crown. At its center pulsed a sphere of light and darkness intertwined, slow and immense. The heart. Fen breathed. But something else waited, rings of runes etched into the ground still smoking. Consecrated sigils. They were here first, Verrin said grimly. A voice answered from the shadows of the basin. Still are. The prelate stepped into view, armor cracked but standing, staff reforged with a core of pulsing void. His eyes glowed pale and fevered. You cannot seal what was born to open. Draven's sword lifted. We've argued this once already. And I learned, the prelate said. You bring your pact here. Thank you. He drove his staff into the ground. The runes ignited, feeding on the heart's pulse. The mountain groaned. Cracks spidered outward. The veil began to unravel. Light poured upward, tearing at itself. Liora staggered, clutching her chest as the pact screamed inside her, half pain, half command. He's using the heart as a doorway. Talon shouted. If it splits, both worlds fall through. Draven lunged toward the prelate, but invisible force slammed him back, claws of shadow pinning him. The prelate's grin was bright as madness. Shadow must serve light, he said. Even if light must burn to rule. Liora's fury drowned her fear. She stepped into the ring of runes. Gold flared, pushing against their white fire. The heart responded, its rhythm shifting to match hers. The pact burned, a song of two voices meeting. Draven's snarl became words. Liora! The vow, finish it! She remembered every syllable they had spoken in the hall, by blood and breath, by shadow and dawn. She continued louder, words echoing across the basin. Draven's voice joined hers where shadow met her gold. The runes buckled. The prelate screamed as the void inside his staff turned inward, devouring him in a swirl of violet sparks. The heart pulsed once, then folded in on itself, shrinking until it became a small sphere of silver resting in the hollow. The mountain stilled. Silence returned, thick, complete, holy. Draven reached her side, catching her before she fell. You anchored it, he said, voice rough. The veil holds. For now, she whispered. They remained on the summit while the others tended to the damage. Finn gathered the ashes of the prelate's staff and sealed them in a charm. Isel sketched new sigils around the heart, murmuring soft blessings. Liora sat with Draven at the edge of the basin, legs dangling over the glowing slope. Below them the veil spread like a galaxy caught in still water. When we leave, will it forget us? She asked. It remembers deeds, not names, Draven said. But that's enough. She looked at him, exhaustion melting into quiet awe. My mother trusted you. She still does, he replied. Everything she hid was to buy this chance, for you to choose. You did. Liora leaned against him. Then what now? He glanced at the horizon, where faint light, the color of morning, bloomed across the strange sky. Now we go home. Both realms will need rebuilding. And when the next fire comes, the pact will be ready. She smiled faintly. Together. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, voice soft as starlight. Always. They stood, hand in hand, and turned from the heart. The veil opened a path of gold and crimson ahead, the same colors that had saved them both from fire. When they stepped back into Verrin, dawn was breaking for real this time. The fortress was scarred but standing. Bells rang not in alarm, but in greeting. Moonlight faded from the towers, replaced by the first gentle sun. Warriors knelt as Draven and Liora crossed the bridge. No one spoke. Reverence filled the space between words. Isel met them halfway, cloak torn but her eyes bright. The veil hums like a lullaby, she said. The world will hold. And the Legion? Draven asked. Scattered, Varro answered. Leaderless, broken. Some fled east, others threw down their sigils. Even zealotry tires. Liora's gaze drifted to the city below. Verrin's rooftops were dusted with frost, smoke curling from chimneys. Life, fragile and stubborn, beginning again. Then let it rebuild, she said. No more fires. Draven's hand found hers. As long as one keeper remains, the bridge stands. Above them, the sky cleared to silver blue, and the hum of the pact softened into peace. Rebuilding began before the ash cooled. Verrin's carpenters swarmed the lower ward with ladders and sawhorses. Blacksmiths hammered dents from shields while apprentices pumped bellows until their arms trembled. The fortress turned into a hive where every corridor hummed with the business of living. Liora spent mornings on the walls with Talon, persuading shattered wards back into music. Afternoons belonged to kitchens and courtyards, listening, learning names, returning the satchel's blade to a sheath on her thigh until the weight felt like punctuation rather than prophecy. Not all change wore friendly faces. At midday on the third day, A column of consecrated approached beneath white banners tied with gray. They stopped beyond bowshot. Their leader, a grizzled captain whose helm hung at his side, lifted both hands in the square salute of surrender. Verro stood beside Liora on the parapet, expression unreadable. If they meant treachery, they'd have come at night. Or with songs, Draven said drily. Songs are worse. Draven joined them, cloak snapping in a wind that smelled of river ice. We meet them beyond the gate, he said. No shadows at our backs. No walls at theirs. They crossed the bridge bareheaded, a deliberate unmasking. The captain's eyes skated over Draven to Liora and stayed there, not hostile, not pleading. Measuring. Keeper, he said. His voice held gravel and sleep lost to hard choices. The prelate burned our dead to fuel his staff. I watched him. I have no more prayers for men like that. What do you want? Liora asked. A trial by work, he said simply. Let us rebuild what we helped break. Bind us to the city for a year and a day. At the end, judge us by the roofs we've raised and the hands we didn't raise. Murmurs ran along the walls. Some angry. Some hopeful. All tired. Draven's gaze sought a cell on the parapet. She gave the barest nod. Loa remembered. Precedent waked. Liora felt the pack's hum steady, neither urging nor warning. Choice sits at the center of every vow. Lay down your sigils, she said. Keep your names. Work in daylight. Sleep in halls with doors that open from both sides. Any man who lifts a relic or a blade without leave is done by Verrin's law. The captain unpinned the legion's mark from his breast and let it drop. Metal rang against stone. One by one his company followed. When the last pin lay in the dust, men looked smaller. Also freer. Report to Brand for assignments, Liora added, and for the first time since the fire, the city exhaled without wincing. Training began as soon as Verrin learned to stand without leaning. Dawn brought pale frost and the hollow, bell-clear quiet of winter skies. Liora met Draven in a yard chalked with circles and scuffed by old duels. Verro watched with his arms folded. Talon settled on a barrel with a cup of something that smoked faintly and smelled like apples and iron. Draven didn't draw his blade. He drew a line with his boot and set a small length of white thread on his palm. Today we cut this without touching it. That's impossible, she said, because testing the world was a habit she refused to lose. Then you will need a different word when it's done. His mouth almost smiled. The pact is language before it is light. Speak with your hands. She tried. Gold crawled reluctantly along her fingers, dimming when she pushed, brightening when she listened. The thread stayed arrogant and whole. Less demand, Draven said from just inside reach. More invitation. Like the seam, she murmured. Exactly like the seam. He didn't touch her. His breath warmed the edge of her ear. Ask. Then answer. Liora let the blade on her thigh anchor the here and now. She breathed into the space behind her sternum where heat pooled. I will not force. Will you open? Gold flared, gentled. The thread quivered, and parted with a sound like frost breaking on a puddle. Talon hooped. Verro let his exhale qualify as applause. Draven's eyes softened from garnet to deep wine. You see? He said. I hear, she corrected, grinning without permission. They moved through drills until the cold forgot to bite. Between lessons they spoke in the grammar of ordinary things, bread that cracked just right, a song a blacksmith sang to his hammer, the particular way Vernon's river smelled when it promised snow. Some afternoons ended with sweat and laughter, others ended with Liora's hands shaking from power that had stretched too far. On those days, Draven's steadiness didn't close in. It made room. Do you regret it? She asked once, meaning the vow, the bridge, the way his life could no longer pretend to be only his. No, he said, as if surprised she did not already know. I feared it. Then I learned a better word. The summit of St. Kessel's rebuilt tower became neutral ground. Human magistrates climbed the new steps wearing winter cloaks and faces that wouldn't yet choose between wonder and wariness. They found vampires waiting with warmed wine and chairs that did not hide a single blade. Isel opened, voice light enough to float but shaped to be heard across weather. The veil holds. The legion is broken. What remains is not a treaty with the court, she said, looking past Draven to Liora. It's a covenant with the keeper. A magistrate with a cedar-scraped voice tapped a ledger. Some in the city still think pact means rule by night. Then we define it out loud, Liora said. The wind worried the ribbon at her throat. She didn't still it. The veil is a seam, not a border. I will keep it with my life. I will not police kitchens and carts. Relics will be registered. Priests may preach until preaching becomes permission for harm. Hunters who serve hearths instead of altars can keep their wages and their work. If you build, I stand with you. If you burn, I stand in front of you. And the court? Another asked, careful around the sharp. Draven didn't lace politics in sugar. We defend the seam, he said. We will not levy tax or tithe. We will take our tithe in peace. If you call for aid against void relics, we answer. If you use void relics, we answer faster. It should have gone badly after that. It did not. Perhaps because Verrin's roofs were new and warm smoke drifted up from streets rather than fire. Perhaps because law tastes better when served with hot wine. Perhaps because every person on that roof had buried someone and was tired of being brave in the wrong direction. They wrote a compact in ordinary ink. It read like a manual: registry, search rights for veil poison, limits on armed processions, a requirement that all sermons be posted for public reading, a narrow clause about work trial for those who renounce zealotry. At the end, the magistrate with the scraped voice added a line without looking at Liora. If the keeper calls a mustering for rift work, all guilds contribute in bodies or goods. Liora signed last and smallest. When she put down the pen, the wind shifted to something warmer than winter. The bell in the rebuilt tower found its note, and held it as if remembering how to sing without mourning. Not all resistance came from outside. 3 nights after the compact, a murmur gathered below the night-glass ceiling, soft, crescent, the sound of stones deciding whether to roll. A faction inside the court wanted old law to wear new clothes, mortals kept at corridors, the pact interpreted as throne. Marith met them with statutes and dates, Isel with patience salted by teeth. It was not enough. A younger lord in coal velvet, Kareen, all cheekbones and certainty, bowed just enough to avoid insult. We accept the keeper, he said, tone implying barely. But not the spectacle of councils where mortals speak as if this is theirs. The pact is ours by birth. Liora noticed Draven's breath sharpen and steady again. He would not cut a courtier in his own hall. Choice sits. This is easy to resolve, she said, stepping onto the circle where she had bound. Ask the seam. Kareen blinked. Ask. The seam knows its keepers. Liora removed her rings and set them on the sigil. Gold and crimson flared. She turned, palms open. Come take them. If the veil warms to your hand, I will return to my mother's cottage and learn to bake the rest of my life. Nice laughter rippled. Not mocking, nervous, surprised to find itself here. Kareen's mouth tightened. He stepped in with the polished indifference of a man sure of his blood. His fingers hovered over the bright ring. It smoked. Not burning, refusing. He snatched his hand back, mask cracking. Whispered amusement traveled like gossip. Kareen bowed again, shallower. It seems the seam is vain, he said, brittle. It is accurate, Draven said mildly. And not sentimental. The faction didn't vanish that night, but it learned to fold its objections into work. Liora made a note in her mind, names, temperaments, pressures to ease before they hardened into knives. She put the rings back on. The hum under the floor purred like something that had chosen correctly, and wanted to be obvious about it. On the day snow finally found its way out of a 6-week promise, Bran knocked on Leora's door with a bundle wrapped in sailcloth. From a mason prying stones where St. Kessel fell, he said. Thought it was ledger paper. I thought otherwise. Inside the cloth lay a tin cylinder plugged with wax. The wax had that same nail nick near the rim. Leora's throat went tight before she touched it. She opened it at her desk with the easy care of someone handling a sleeping animal. A second letter slid free, the ink browned, the hand her mother's. If you are reading the first, you need instruction. If you are reading the second, you need forgiveness. Leora sat very still and let the words arrive inside her. I was not only guarding you. I was guarding a grief I did not know how to ask you to share. Before you, I crossed the veil. I went too far. I brought back a man I loved more than breath, and he did not belong where I set him. He sickened. He burned. He taught me that bridges are for crossing, not for stealing. When you chose, I feared you might choose to pull the world toward you as I did. If I am gone, it is because I finally learned to put things back where they sleep. If Draven remembers me, tell him I kept my temper and my bargains, mostly. Tell him I was wrong about one thing only. I thought love was a thing that took. It is also the oldest thing that keeps. I cannot teach you now. I can only trust you. The page blurred. Leora pressed it to her mouth to steady breathing. When she lowered it, Draven was in the doorway, apology in his eyes for the unasked entrance, and something gentler beneath. She handed him the letter. He read silently, once, twice, a third time that was slower than the first two combined. I remember, he said. She was half storm and half fabric, mended better than new. I did not deserve her friendship then. I try to now. She asks me to forgive her, Leora whispered. And I do. But I think she also wanted me to forgive myself. For what? For living when she didn't. The words shook, then held. For choosing a vow that wasn't her ending. Draven touched the tin with 2 fingers, reverent. We'll keep her in the work, he said. Not a shrine. A method. Spring arrived on a noon wind that smelled of wet stone and wild onion. Verrin celebrated like a city that had met its own funeral and refused to attend. Banners twisted from windowsills, children ran with paper crowns, old men in patched coats stood on corners arguing about the correct spice for jam and the proper direction to nail horseshoes above doors. The court opened its gates and did a thing it had not done in recorded memory, a public rite. Not a coronation. A keeping. They laid a circle of quicksilver around the hall of night glass, open at one point like an unfinished sentence. Liora and Draven stepped into the gap and faced one another barefoot, the stone cool and clean. Isel spoke first, voice formal but not stiff. By the right of work and witness, Verrin asks. Obsidian answers. 2 keepers, 1 seam. What do you vow? Draven didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Leora as if the crowd were a weather report, and the weather was fine. I vow to stand at thresholds until my bones learn their shape, he said. To be a door when a door is needed and a wall when a wall keeps. I vow to choose, not to hunger. When I forget, I vow to be reminded, Leora answered. The pact rose under her tongue. I vow to ask first, she said. To cut clean. To burn only what would devour. I vow to keep names where zeal would strip them. I vow to let love be work and not only fever. She hesitated, then let the smallest truth out where all could hear it. I vow to go on living if shadow outlives me, and I ask shadow to do the same if daybreak goes before. A sound moved through the crowd, half sigh, half promise offered back. Draven's mouth softened. He extended his hand. Together? He said finally, simple as bread. Together, she answered, and the circle flashed shut like a blink. The quicksilver line rose and spun in thin threads around their shoulders and wrists, then fell as a scatter of safe sparks. Bells answered each other across roofs and river. When night came, there were more lamps than stars. That felt right. The stars were busy somewhere else, holding a seam together. Months later, Verrin learned to be a city again without explaining itself to every dawn. Shops grew temperamental about opening on time. The baker on Pike Lane married the cooper and taught him to stop tapping barrels at dinner. Brand built a map in the guardhouse made of string and absurd confidence that showed every tunnel and 2 that had the courtesy not to exist. Talon opened a little school in a sunroom where wards sang to children who sang back. Fin disappeared and reappeared with old prayers defanged and tied with ribbon like snakes that remembered being rope. Vero taught archers to breathe with the bow until their arrows forgot to miss. The compact held. The registry filled with relics brought out of hiding and turned into simple curios once their names were scraped clean. A handful of consecrated hired on as masons and discovered they liked the ache of honest tiredness. Kareen learned to bow without grinding his teeth. Mostly. Liora and Draven kept the seam the way farmers keep weather, watching, adjusting, working when others slept. Some nights they walked to the underlake and listened to the tone until it said fine. Some nights they crossed and checked the heart, placing new sigils where old ones grew thin. Some nights they taught each other silence. Grief did not vanish. It learned its place at the table and did not reach for more than its share. On a storm-bellied afternoon, Liora sat with her mother's second letter open beside a cup gone cold, and realized the ache's edges had gentled. Love had found work to do and was busy. Where next? She asked, leaning against Draven on the fortress's highest parapet. The wind tasted like distant rain. He scanned a horizon that no longer looked like a threat. There is a village 3 valleys east that thinks its well is haunted. It is only an old gate singing under bad boards. We can fix it before supper. Ambitious? She said, smiling. We have time. He answered, fingers threading with hers. The seam holds when we do the small things right. Below them, Verrin rang the hour. Above them, clouds opened just enough for a rag of clear sky to grin through. The pack thrummed, not as a summons, not as an alarm, but like a heartbeat that had decided to become a lullaby and then remembered that lullabies are also vows. They turned from the parapet and went to work. By the time the first harvest festival came, Verrin's scars had turned into stories. Children played in the courtyard where the Legion's banners once burned, tracing the faded scorch marks with sticks and calling them dragon paths. The scent of roasted grain and honeyed cider hung over the market square. Music wandered up through the narrow streets, loose and generous. Liora and Draven walked among the crowd unnoticed for once. A group of children darted around them, chasing a floating ribbon of gold that had escaped from a juggler's torch spell. It brushed Leora's arm, sparkled, and dissolved. Even the magic behaves now, she said, smiling. Or it's trying to impress you. Draven replied. You're very good for its reputation. They stopped by a stall where an old potter displayed bowls marbled in black and white clay. 2 halves joined before the kiln, the woman said, pressing one into Leora's hands. If they survive the fire together, they're stronger. The trick is to fire them hot enough to test, not to destroy. Liora looked at Draven, and something unspoken passed between them. We'll take this one, she said. The potter winked and refused payment. That evening, they set the bowl on the table in the keep's kitchen. Draven filled it with water from the newly blessed well. Light and shadow rippled together across its surface, never quite settling. To Verrin, Liora said. To what we keep, he answered, and they drank. Summer followed as if eager to prove the world could be simple again. The river ran fat and green, roofs bloomed with drying herbs, and merchants from distant cities returned with caravans heavy enough to make the bridges groan. Liora spent her mornings cataloging relics with Fin's apprentices. Each item, amulet, page, nail, was wrapped, labeled, and cleansed until its hum matched the ordinary rhythm of the city. Draven oversaw the ward menders, his patience worn but intact. In the evenings they would meet on the ramparts to compare notes and silence. One night, the air pressed thick with heat and stormlight. Thunder rolled from the mountains. Liora leaned on the wall, hair sticking to her neck. Do you ever miss before? She asked. Before? When the world didn't ask us to be symbols. He thought a long time. Sometimes. But symbols are only shadows cast by people doing their work. We just keep moving and let the light decide what shape we make. Lightning flashed, carving their silhouettes on the stones. Then I hope it's a good one, she murmured. Draven turned toward her. It is. Rain began as he kissed her, gentle as the first drop on dust. Years began to take on rhythm instead of count. The court no longer whispered when Liora entered. The consecrated rebuilt their libraries, this time with open doors. Pilgrims came not to beg miracles but to learn how to keep them contained. The seam beneath Verrin remained quiet, its tones steady as breath in sleep. Once every season, the pact required renewal, a moment when Liora and Draven stood in the Underlake's mirrored cavern, palms joined, voices meeting in that ancient vow. Each time, the light answered softer, as if satisfied. After the fifth renewal, Isel approached with parchments sealed in silver wax. "We've found another seam," she said. "Far north, near the frost line. It hums the same tune." Draven looked at Liora. She smiled, though her pulse quickened. "Then the world still needs keeping." "Always will," Isel said, and left them to decide. That night, they walked the city walls, torches dotting the streets below like constellations fallen to earth. "If we go," Liora said, "we leave this place to others." "Which is the point?" Draven said. "A bridge that never lets anyone cross is only a monument." They stood a while longer, listening to the hum of Verrin beneath their feet, and knew they would go. The journey north took them through valleys where the air smelled of pine and stone. Villages bowed them through, offering bread, sometimes silence. The road grew steeper, snow began to lace the grass. On the seventh night they reached the cliff where the new seam waited, thin light bleeding through cracks in a frozen lake. "It's Yum," Liora said, crouching. "Barely born." Draven knelt beside her. "Then we teach it to sleep properly." They set their hands to the ice. Gold and crimson rippled beneath, meeting in the heart of the fissure. The hum rose, uncertain, then fell into the same calm key as Verrin's. The ice sealed. The glow faded to a quiet pulse. When it was done, Draven pressed a palm to the frozen surface. "Every seam is a story learning how to end without collapsing. And we're the punctuation," she said, smiling. "Commas, I think," he answered. "There's always more sentence to come." They turned back toward the south, the aurora spilling green fire over the peaks behind them. Seasons turned like pages that no one hurried to finish. Verrin healed. The scent of smoke gave way to cedar and rain, and the markets filled again with the chatter of bakers and blacksmiths, of children running between archways rebuilt with pale stone. Music returned, not as celebration but as something steadier, an everyday kind of hope. Liora often walked the outer walls at dawn. From up there, the city looked like a living promise, roofs glimmering with dew, banners drifting lazily in the wind, the river bending through the valley like a strip of light that refused to dim. Some mornings Draven joined her, silent until the sun broke the ridge. Those were her favorite mornings, the world before words, the quiet before duty. Inside the fortress, the council chambers thrummed with purpose. The Crimson Court and the mortal delegates now shared the same long table, their voices layered but not hostile. There were arguments, of course. Old habits took generations to soften, but no blades were drawn. Every discussion ended with the same phrase carved into the marble floor beneath their feet: keep the balance. When the day's decisions grew heavy, Liora retreated to the Underlake. Its mirror surface still glowed faintly, gold and crimson intertwined like a pulse. Sometimes she felt it react when she approached, a slow, resonant note of recognition. The Covenant lived, patient as ever. That night, she found Draven in the library, bent over an old map spread across the table. Its ink shimmered faintly, tracing the lines of the seams that crossed the world like rivers of sleeping fire. "They're changing," he murmured. "The hum from the western mountains, it's louder than it should be." Liora frowned, stepping closer. "You think the hunters are returning?" He shook his head. "No. This is older. Deeper. The veil itself might be moving again." She studied the map, the crimson veins pulsing gently beneath the parchment. "Then we'll go," she said quietly. "If the balance shifts, we follow it." Draven looked up at her then, a faint smile cutting through his concern. "Always the brave one." "Not brave," she replied. "Just tired of waiting for the next fire to start." Outside, the bells of Verrin rang the midnight watch. Their notes echoed across the city, low, solemn, beautiful. Somewhere in that sound was peace, and somewhere else, a warning. Draven rolled the map carefully and tied it with silver cord. "Tomorrow we ride east," he said. "If the seams are stirring, we need to see it with our own eyes." Liora nodded, though her gaze lingered on the moonlight rippling through the window. The Covenant pulsed softly in her chest, steady calm, but with a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. Like a heartbeat waiting for something to begin. The night wind whispered through the arches of the fortress. Far beyond the mountains, unseen threads of light and shadow stirred beneath the earth. Old magic dreaming of new forms. And though Verrin slept, the world was not yet done testing its keepers. The dawn before departure carried a strange stillness. Clouds drifted low over Verrin's spires, their bellies reflecting crimson light from the fortress lanterns. Liora fastened her cloak, feeling the hum of the Covenant rise like a pulse beneath her skin. It wasn't agitation. It was recognition, like the air itself knew what waited. Draven met her at the gate, his stallion black as poured ink, armor dusted in frost. He said nothing, only offered a hand to help her mount. Words felt unnecessary. They had learned to read each other's silences. Behind them, the fortress gates groaned open. A dozen riders followed, scholars, sentries, and one quiet priest whose robes still smelled faintly of the old wars. The path east wound between valleys glazed with mist, the land still scarred by ancient fires. By midday, the hum grew louder. Not in the air this time, but in the ground, faint tremors like the echo of a heartbeat buried beneath stone. Birds flew in crooked patterns. The horses grew restless. Draven slowed his mount. "It's close." Liora scanned the horizon. The valley ahead rippled with heat though the air was cold. At its center stood a single obsidian spire, cracked down its middle, leaking thin smoke that glittered gold and red. A sleeping seam, waking. They made camp at the valley's edge. The spire loomed in the distance, humming softly like a voice behind a closed door. None of the sentries slept easily. Every so often, a whisper crawled through the wind, half language, half sigh. Liora sat near the fire, rolling a small stone between her fingers. It was warm to the touch, a shard of the Underlake she'd taken years ago. Its glow now pulsed in time with the spire's rhythm. Draven joined her, lowering himself onto the log beside her. "It's not human," he said. "The vibration, it's layered. 2 harmonics. One ours, one not. Could it be another veil? Another crossing?" He shook his head slowly. "No. It's too fractured. Something tried to open it from the wrong side." Liora looked toward the spire again. "Then we're not the only ones who learned to reach across worlds." A faint rustle came from beyond the camp. The guards tensed, blades half drawn. But it was only a fox, a silver creature with fur that shimmered faintly in 2 tones, one pale as dawn, one dark as blood. It paused at the firelight's edge, watching them with eyes that glowed gold. Draven's breath caught. "That's no fox." The creature bowed its head once, then vanished into smoke. And for the first time since the Covenant's creation, both keepers felt the unmistakable chill of being watched by something older than their vow. The next morning, the spire cracked open. It didn't explode or shatter, it breathed. A long exhale of mist poured from the fissure, curling around the valley floor. The air grew colder, and the hum pitched lower until it thrummed through their bones. Liora stepped forward despite the shouts to stay back. "It's calling to us," she said. Draven followed, his hand hovering near his sword. "Or warning." The ground trembled beneath their boots. The mist parted, revealing a figure kneeling at the spire's base, a man, or something close. His skin shimmered faintly translucent, veins pulsing with dim light. When he lifted his head, his eyes were the same gold as the fox's. "You hear it too," he said, voice cracked from disuse. "The world beneath the world." Liora approached cautiously. "Who are you?" "Once a keeper. Long before your names were spoken." He smiled faintly, brittle as glass. "I sealed a seam that never slept. And now it's dreaming through me." Draven stiffened. "He's half bonded," he whispered. "The seam used him." The man's gaze flickered between them. No, Prince. It chose me. And it will choose again. The mist surged upward, and he vanished into it. Only the spire remained, cracked wider now, whispering their names. They followed the trail the stranger left behind, north through the mountain passes, where frost never melted. The hum followed them, sometimes in the wind, sometimes in their dreams. Liora began hearing fragments of voices when she slept, whispers of a city drowned in its own reflection, bells tolling beneath the sea, a hand reaching through water that wasn't water at all. Each morning she woke breathless. Draven noticed. "The seam's speaking to you," he said. "You're its mirror. I thought I was its keeper. Perhaps now you're both." That evening, as snow fell in slow spirals, they reached a frozen lake. The ice glowed faintly from below, not with gold or crimson, but silver. A color neither of them had ever seen in the Covenant's language. Liora knelt, pressing her palm to the surface. The hum quieted, replaced by a steady pulse that matched her heartbeat. When she drew her hand back, a single symbol had appeared beneath the ice, two overlapping circles with a third emerging between them. "A third vow," she whispered. Draven frowned. "There were only ever two. Not anymore." The discovery shook the court when they returned. The scholars debated for days. The priests prayed until their voices cracked. Some called it evolution, others heresy. Liora and Draven were summoned before the council. The moon-haired elder, older now and frilier, studied them in silence before speaking. "You claim the Covenant has birthed a third vow?" Liora nodded. "The symbol repeats beneath the ice. The hum sings it. It's not a fracture, it's an awakening," Draven added quietly. "And something, or someone, already bears it." The council chamber erupted in murmurs. "If another line has been formed," said one elder, "then balance itself may be rewriting its rules." Liora met their gaze. "Then we must learn them before someone else does." Outside, the bells tolled again. But this time, the sound trembled, distorted, half a note too high, like an echo coming from beneath the city instead of above. Draven's hand found hers beneath the table. "Whatever this is," he murmured, "it's not done with us." And in the distance, the frozen lake began to crack. Days later, reports came from the northern settlements, rivers turning silver, flocks flying in spirals, and people waking from dreams of mirrors that sang. The Covenant's pulse, once steady and warm, had grown erratic. In the fortress library, Liora pored over ancient texts, some so old the ink had turned to dust. Between their brittle pages, she found a fragment written in an extinct tongue. Draven leaned over her shoulder as she translated aloud. "When shadow and sun make peace, the third flame shall rise, neither day nor night, but memory given form." "The third flame," Draven said. "Could that be the color we saw?" Liora nodded slowly. "Silver. It's memory. The seams are remembering themselves." Before they could speak further, the floor quivered. Shelves rattled. The chandeliers flickered, then dimmed. A single, low note echoed through the stone halls, the same hum, but slower, heavier, like a heartbeat beginning to fail. Liora looked up sharply. "It's not just remembering," she whispered. "It's waking everything it ever forgot." The night sky turned strange. Stars flickered out, not all at once, but in clusters. As though something vast moved behind them, blocking light for moments too long to be coincidence. Farmers claimed their shadows lingered a heartbeat after they walked away. Liora and Draven stood on the parapets, the city below restless with unease. "It's spreading faster than we thought," Draven said. "The seams are resonating across the continents. If the third vow completes itself, it could rewrite the Covenant," Liora finished. "And not just ours. Every bond, every promise, every breath of peace." A messenger arrived breathless. "From the western coast," he gasped. "The sea has turned to glass. Ships float but cannot move." Liora closed her eyes. The silver light they'd seen beneath the ice, it was everywhere now, bleeding into rivers, skies, hearts. "We need to reach the first seam," she said. The Underlake. If memory is waking, that's where it began. Draven nodded grimly. Then Verrin must remember its makers. The journey back felt both endless and immediate, as if the world bent around them. The fields they had once seen green now shimmered with thin mist that reflected no light. Voices whispered from wells and pools. Even the horses moved reluctantly, hooves striking the ground like echoes in a dream. When they reached Verrin, the city was quieter than they had ever known it. The people bowed as they passed, but not in reverence, in relief. As if something inside them recognized the keepers were returning for a reason no one dared name. At the Underlake, the air was thick with luminescence. The mirror no longer slept, it glowed from within, silver rising through gold and crimson like breath through lungs. When Liora stepped forward, the light reached toward her. Draven took her hand. "Once more," he said. She nodded. Together, they touched the surface. The reflection rippled, and didn't show them. Instead, it showed a new shape forming in the depths, not human, not vampire. Something woven of light and shadow both, its eyes opening with the softest sound imaginable, a sigh that could topple kingdoms. The creature emerged slowly, neither threatening nor gentle. Its voice was many voices at once, ancient, curious, and heartbreakingly young. "You are the keepers," it said. "I am what you forgot to name." Liora's pulse raced. "The third vow." It inclined its head. "I am memory becoming will. I am the balance that chooses itself." Draven stepped forward cautiously. "If balance now thinks, what does it want?" "To continue," the being said simply. "But continuation requires change." Liora felt her knees weaken. "Change how?" The being smiled, and every seam in the world seemed to pulse once in answer. "You built walls between realms to stop the fires. I will build bridges that never close." Draven's jaw tightened. "Bridges can become traps. And prisons can become homes," the being replied softly. "It is time for the worlds to meet again." Before either keeper could stop it, the creature sank back into the light. The Underlake blazed silver. Outside, the bells of Verrin rang without being touched. For the next 7 nights, the world refused to sleep. Ocean stilled. Rivers reversed. The moon split into 2 halves that drifted apart like drifting eyes. People dreamed of walking through reflections that answered when spoken to. Liora and Draven worked without rest, tracing the hum through every corridor of the fortress. The Covenant's pulse was no longer just theirs, it threaded through the world, binding itself to every living thing. "This isn't destruction," Draven said finally. "It's evolution." Liora stood at the high window, staring out at the horizon where dawn met dusk without ever deciding which it wanted to be. "Then we need to understand what it's becoming before it decides we don't belong in it." She turned to him, her voice steady but filled with awe. "Draven, what if the third vow isn't a threat?" He looked out beside her, eyes narrowing as light spilled across the city. "Then it's a beginning." And beneath Verrin, in the Underlake's mirrored heart, the silver glow began to take shape again, waiting for its name, waiting for its keepers, waiting for the next chapter. The night before the world would change forever, Verrin stood silent. No bells, no firelight, only the soft silver glow spilling from the cracks of the Underlake below. The air shimmered with that familiar hum, the sound of something vast taking one last breath before it became something else. Liora and Draven stood at the edge of the mirror chamber, the reflection beneath them no longer showing sky or stone, but endless light. The third vow had awakened. Its pulse reached every corner of the realm, threading through rivers, roots, even the stars themselves. "It's everywhere now," Draven said quietly. "There's no going back." Liora nodded, fingers brushing the hilt of her blade, the same one she'd carried since the first war, now faintly glowing in her hand. "There never was. We were never meant to keep the world still." The surface rippled. The silver being rose again. Taller now, radiant yet calm, its form a living seam of all colors at once. Its voice, when it spoke, filled the air with the weight of every promise ever made. "You have done what no keeper before you dared," it said. "You held the world long enough for it to learn to hold itself." Draven stepped closer, his eyes catching faint light. And now? No, the being said, smiling with both sorrow and joy. You let it go. The light began to rise, wrapping around them in threads that hummed like lullabies. Liora felt the covenant move through her chest, every vow, every echo, every heartbeat that had ever passed through the pact. It didn't burn, it remembered. She turned to Draven, voice trembling but sure. If it breaks, will we still find each other? He took her hand, and their joined fingers glowed gold and crimson one final time. Always. Every bridge leads back home. The light consumed them. The chamber shuddered, the underlake collapsing upward into a single column that pierced the ceiling and spilled into the dawn. All across Verrin, people woke to find silver mist floating through the streets, soft and warm, whispering names they'd never known but somehow remembered. When the light faded, the fortress stood empty, quiet but alive. The mirror below had turned to still water. And for the first time in history, the world hummed on its own. Some said they saw two figures walking through the silver fields at sunrise, hand in hand, their shapes made of light and shadow intertwined. Others said they became the seam itself. Keepers turned to memory, memory turned to balance. Whatever truth the world chose to believe, Verrin endured. The covenant held. The third vow sang. And the seam, at last, learned how to breathe without breaking.